Welcome back to my mental health and crime channel. My name is Huda London. This is the case of the Idaho quadruple murders. Bryan Christopher Kohberger has been accused of 4 counts of murders and 1 count of burglary. Did he do the crime? Or is he just being accused of doing the crime? All it takes is one juror to come out with reasonable doubt. Where are the 3 unidentified male DNAs? And where's the evidence of the genealogical DNA? The knife sheet had a touch DNA, and that can be from anywhere. I've explained that before. The best example is if somebody shakes your hand and goes and does unlivings, murders, then your DNA would be on the knife sheet or wherever you touched. Why aren't the prosecution handing over the evidence so that the defense attorney could defend the client properly?
Who had all of these problems, the better.
All it takes is one juror to plant that seed of reasonable doubt.
Bryan Kohberger is gearing up for the fight of his life against 4 first-degree murder charges. There's a lot of evidence against him, the latest being a News Nation report that he allegedly had an ID belonging to one of the victims in his possession after the murders. In the court of public opinion, the 28-year-old criminology student has all but been convicted. A court of public opinion, however, is not a court of law. It doesn't matter if he looks like the type, if he gives you the creeps, if there's just something about his eyes. The only thing that matters will be the opinion of 12 jurors. Convincing 12 people beyond a reasonable doubt that a person has committed murder is a daunting task, and one that his defense team will try to thwart at every turn. And they've already started. If you know anything about the case of the Idaho 4, you know that investigators have uncovered a lot of evidence connecting Bryan Kohberger to the crimes. But former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani says defense lawyers will be prepared for a fight.
That's what they're going to do. They're going to put up factual roadblocks as well as legal hurdles as well. That's why you see them attacking everything.
From the time of his arrest, Bryan Kohberger has been working on his defense. One of the first things he did was waive his right to a speedy trial. This was so his lawyers could have as much time as possible to go through the evidence against him and find ways to poke holes in it. But something we don't often think about is how important it is going to be for the defense team to humanize him.
So you're really up against a lot. And so the more that you can do to present him as a human being who had all of these problems, the better. I try to get the jury to walk in their shoes and to understand who they are. Bryan Kohberger is a petri dish of psychopathology. A defense psychiatrist would have a lot to work with.
The brutality of the killings, the innocence of the victims, frankly, the number of victims are chilling. And the prosecutor will tell the jury the story of a boogeyman, a nightmare made real, a masked murderer who appeared in the dead of night to massacre 4 people when they were at their most vulnerable, asleep in their beds. So it's going to be up to Kohberger's team to remind them he's just a young guy, a local student who might have even had a pretty tough life up until then.
In terms of helping the defense, what I do is really get into their life from the time they were born. And then I get into, their schooling. Were they bullied? Did they have any medical problems, when they were growing up, or psychological problems?
The way it works, according to forensic psychiatrist Dr. Lieberman, is like this. The defense team would hire a forensic psychiatrist like her who would sit down over the course of many sessions to unravel who the defendant is, from childhood to adolescence to adulthood, and identify ways to make him sympathetic to the jury. Dr. Lieberman has testified for the defense on a number of criminal trials and says that creating some empathy for the defendant can mean the difference between life and death. So this is how humanizing Kohberger could come into play in his case for the defense.
What could a defense psychiatrist do with all that? Well, one thing, you could show the times, the multiple times throughout his life, and even recently in a bar near where he lives in Pennsylvania, he was rejected by these women, and it was written in the notes, if this guy comes in, he's, going to harass you and so on. So you'd show that whole string, for all the years of his life. Then, and how painful that was for him and so on.
His defense team will then want to attack the evidence, how it was collected, the science behind it. The biggest piece of evidence that we know of so far is that knife sheath. It's a military-style K-bar knife sheath that was left at the crime scene next to the body of one of the victims. And according to police, Bryan Kohberger's DNA was the only DNA found on that sheath on the snap. Sounds pretty bad, but forensics expert Joseph Scott Morgan explains that the defendant needs to be connected to the knife, to the murder weapon, in a lot more ways than just a little bit of DNA.
Well, the first thing you have to do as an investigator is to find out whether or not any person in that home owned a knife sheath that is similar to that. The defense will look at that.
To paraphrase here, the defense will want to know if one of the other roommates or perhaps one of their boyfriends also owns a K-bar style knife, and they can use that to then question whether the sheath found at the scene belongs to one of them and maybe not Bryan Kohberger.
That is actually very interesting. Could one of the roommates or the surviving roommates own a K-bar knife? Because the knife sheath was under Maddie's leg, I believe, or under her duvet. So the question is, could the girls have had a knife and they felt unsafe and put the knife near them? Did the killers use the knife of the girls to do these horrific crimes? That is an important question. And did one of their boyfriends, ex-boyfriends, Hudiga even, he seems to be playing around with K-bar knives and he's good in hunting. Could one of them have owned the knife sheath? Those are all very important questions.
The roommates or perhaps one of their boyfriends also owns a K-bar style knife, and they can use that to then question whether the sheath found at the scene belongs to one of them and maybe not Bryan Kohberger. Okay, I'm sure you're thinking at this point, yeah, but investigators said they found Kohberger's DNA on the snap. I was thinking the same thing. It's kind of hard to argue that it isn't his knife, but I was wrong. Nima Ramani points out that the defense will have their own theories and their own science to try to dismantle this for the jury.
The defense is going to attack the evidence in this case, and one thing that I expect them to do is attack the DNA, say it's not reliable, it's only one source, and it could have been transferred there by anyone, and there's going to be a whole host of other people that have DNA there.
A whole host.
It's important to mention that the knife sheath had a touch DNA, and a touch DNA doesn't necessarily connect Bryan Kohberger to the case. Somebody could have planted the evidence, allegedly, or somebody could have touched him or shook hands with him and then touched the knife sheath. Let's not forget that the 8 hours, I'm talking about 8 hours, passed before 911 was called. Touch DNA could be anything. The main evidence I'm sure that Ann Taylor is asking for is that the prosecution has to explain the genealogical evidence that they took from Bryan Christopher Kohberger. The roadmap, how did they get to that? The DNA was transferred from Idaho lab to Texas FBI lab. Could it have been tampered on the way? We've seen the crime scene. Since this was a quadruple murders, I don't believe that the police were prepared for that. So at the start, many people went in without gloves, without the whole forensic kit. Let's not forget when the surviving roommates found, allegedly, the 4 victims, may they rest in peace, unlived, they called the Sigma Chi boys. And the neighbors came out, so when one of them was unconscious and fainted, I guess, I've read articles that there were other people, neighbors, that went inside and went up to the 3rd floor and found Maddie and Kaylee. So did they touch them? Did they touch the doors, obviously? Many people have been inside the house. There was 3 unidentified DNAs in the house besides the knife sheet. 1 glove outside, the shoe with the latent print, the Vans, and there was, I think, a fingerprint on the Good Vibes picture. I believe there was a struggle near the Good Vibes picture because the forensic team was there a lot and you could see they were taking pictures. And they were taking a lot of pictures and a lot of forensic tests on, not on the sliding door, but the little window near the sliding door. Were there many people in the house? Did the crimes happen inside the house, or could it have happened outside the house? And maybe if it happened outside, they obviously took the deceased victims and placed them at the house, because Eaton was between the corridor and Xana's room, allegedly. Xana put up a fight, so we were told in the beginning that the victims were sleeping, but now we know they weren't. We were told in the beginning that the surviving roommates were on the 1st floor, but later on we found out that the surviving roommates were upstairs. Or one of them was at least upstairs in the 2nd floor, and she saw a man with black clothing. That could have been anyone. She said somebody whose height, DM said, was around 5'11", but Kohberger's around 6'1" to 6'2".
Host of other people have DNA there. This is what the defense will likely latch onto like a dog with a bone. Now, the scene of the crime here is unique in a lot of ways. There are essentially 3 crime scenes. Bedroom 1 on the top floor, where Kaylee Gonsalves and Maddie Mogan were killed. Bedroom 2 on the 2nd floor, where Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin were killed. And then kind of the house as a whole. 6 residents lived in 1122 King Road at one point, and the house was really known as a party spot on the University of Idaho campus. And this isn't just talk, there's proof. Body cam footage from multiple incidents show police dropping by the house due to noise complaints from different parties. We actually see Kaylee and Xana in some of these videos telling cops they're going to keep it down, while there are who knows how many people in the house behind them.
Can the defense explain away that forensic evidence with a forensic expert on the stand and say,
Could they have gotten there from a party? Could they have gotten there from?
Yeah. I suppose they could, and I think that I'm glad, I'm glad you mentioned 3, because it's like, if you got 1, that's a much easier hill for the defense to climb.
But if I were on the defense team, I would want this video above all the others to be shown to the jurors to really illustrate this point. What you're going to see here is footage from police responding to another noise complaint. This one is different, and what makes it different is huge for the defense. See if you can pick up on it.
How goes it?
Oh, hi, how are you?
Who lives here?
We're not actually.
You don't know who lives here?
No, I don't.
We're just here for a noise complaint.
Oh, okay. No.
Well, no one's here that's trespassing, but no one that lives here is here right now.
So where'd they go?
They're just not here. I have no clue where they went. No clue.
So you guys just throwing a party in their house at
They
this
were
time?
here at one point. They're not here right now. I just searched all the rooms.
They left and went over to some other party, and everyone in the
I
package
just
to
searched
go over
all the
to
rooms.
them.
There's a raging party going on here, and not a single person who lives in the house was there at the time. This can really illustrate maybe how lax the girls were about their home. Dozens, maybe hundreds of people were in and out over the course of the semester, so the defense will argue that it is more than plausible that Kohberger just attended a party there, and maybe that's how his DNA ended up in the house.
At least according to reports, there's a single source of DNA in the knife sheet. The defense, of course, will argue that that was transferred, but you would hope to get a lot more DNA evidence at the home, especially when the reports are that this was a party home and there were a lot of people coming in and out. So I fully expect there to be a lot of other DNA evidence in that house.
We tend to get laser focused on the single source of DNA found on the knife sheath, which cops say was Bryan Kohberger's. But when the house was processed by crime scene techs, they're likely to find dozens, hundreds of sources of DNA scattered through the house. Just look at these Daily Mail exclusive photos. This is the preserved crime scene. So after the murders, police left the home as it was, essentially freezing it in time so that they can process the evidence just how it was left when the bodies were discovered. So what you're looking at here is inside of the house, exactly what it looked like the night the killer slipped inside and knifed 4 people to death.
I wonder if this is blood. I mean, red liquid. Was there a struggle in the kitchen?
Likely expect to see from a college house. There's food, wrappers, half-drank coffees, dirty dishes, beer pong, empty liquor bottles. You know, not only does this add to that party house angle, but it also shows just how easy it could be for a skilled defense attorney to argue that Kohberger's DNA was just one of many scattered around this house and doesn't necessarily point to him being a killer.
Too, they've got to hold on to these, no pun intended, to these little threads that they can, because, and this is well worn, Caitlin, you know, people will always say, you know, all it takes is one juror to, you know, to kind of plant that seed of reasonable doubt, you know, in their mind. And there's no doubt in my mind that the defense is going to utilize that.
DNA at the scene isn't the only evidence that Kohberger's team will go after. A while back, Bryan's lawyers halted the cleanup of the crime scene once it was released by investigators because they wanted to do their own investigation in person. Makes sense. But his lawyer needed a court order. His attorney and a few others spent about an hour in and around the property examining it and taking photos. And they had to get a judge to sign off to stop the cleanup so that they could go in. And this may be raised again at trial if his attorney tries to argue that potentially exculpatory evidence was destroyed. And speaking of exculpatory evidence, meaning evidence that could help exonerate the defendant, Joseph Scott Morgan points out what he thinks is a glaring error by investigators. Before an arrest was made, some of the victim's personal items deemed unnecessary to the investigation by police were released to the family, and that may be a huge win for Kohberger.
I made kind of a stink early on about, do you remember when they said that they were allowing items to leave the property for the purposes of sentimental reasons, which was the biggest ton of garbage I've ever heard. Why would you do that? I wonder what was leaving. And this is even before his representatives had a chance to go through that. Now, an arrest, I don't think, and I might be misremembering, but I don't think an arrest had been effected at that point in time. But they had things walking out the door to God only knows where. What I would not have done, the release of the things from the scene, that sort of thing. I'm not a big fan of that. Never will be. Now they're going to allegedly tear it down.
And very early in the investigation, cops were accused of bungling some of the evidence collection. Garbage from 1122 King Road was allowed to be picked up and thrown into a trash truck with refuse from a bunch of other homes on the block. So cops in hazmat suits had to sift through the rubbish to extract the bags belonging to the crime scene. So the defense can really question what might have been lost or tainted in the process.
That is a very interesting point. Why was the garbage not properly checked? Everything was thrown away. The knife could have been in the garbage. The mask that these people were using could have been allegedly in the garbage. We don't know what was in the garbage. And this is really important too. How come the police decided, the chief, to give back some of the belongings to the parents and to the families? That could have had DNA, sufficient DNA on it. I remember the 2 mattresses were one of them. There were many boxes. There were a couple of suitcases. All that could have been really important. So Ann Taylor can use that against them. That was a really unprofessional thing to do. The whole crime scene was dealt with in a very unprofessional way. Now I wanted to show you all this because it's important. You can clearly see Xana's window, and you can see downstairs there's no blood, like Crime Circus said, and other people were talking about it. I don't believe the ladder was actually even used in this crime scene. Others, they would have taken the ladder out. I remember there were people on YouTube that complained to the FBI, and the FBI did not take the ladder because I believe that was unnecessary. But you can clearly see here, although there's snow, the red stain would have shown. There isn't any red stain there. You can see that from here. And I've zoomed in closely. There isn't any red stain.
1122 King Road was allowed to be picked up and thrown into a trash truck with refuse from a bunch of other homes on the block. So cops in hazmat suits had to sift through the rubbish to extract the bags belonging to the crime scene. So the defense can really question what might have been lost or tainted in the process. One of the other damning pieces of evidence is the cell phone tower pings, placing Kohberger's phone in the vicinity of the house. According to the arrest affidavit, his phone pinged 12 times near King Road in the months leading up to the murders. Cops combined that cell data along with CCTV footage of his car to tie him to the home on the night of the crime, but it wasn't exact.
We know the cell site evidence is key, but the defense is already trying to poke holes in that, saying that the cell phone evidence doesn't match up with the video surveillance of the white Hyundai Elantra, maybe minutes off. So all the defense can do in a case like this is raise reasonable doubt.
And it always comes back to that white Hyundai Elantra, the rolling crime scene, as Joseph Scott Morgan named it, where investigators are searching for forensic evidence like hairs and blood from the victims. Kohberger drove that car for nearly 2 months between the time of the murders and the time of his arrest, not to mention the fact that he and his father made a roughly 2,700-mile cross-country trip. The defense team is going to seize on that.
They'll even make hay of the car leaving Idaho and traveling all of that distance. And I apologize. I had looked up the mileage at one point in time from Pullman.
I think it's 2,700, if I can remember correctly, somewhere around there.
Yeah, and I can just visualize, because I've watched some of these trials. I can just visualize one of these defense attorneys standing there and saying, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, 2,700 miles. How much evidence could potentially be lost along the way?"
Now, on this journey home, you're going to recall that Kohberger was pulled over twice by police in 10 minutes. And Dr. Lieberman says that the body cam footage indicated to her something peculiar about he and his father. What do you think?
Well, first of all, we don't know very much about his childhood. There have been tons of news reports about him and so on, but all we know is what we saw of his father in the car. That was a little strange. There's a clue right there that there is something strange.
She added that addressing potential issues at home as a child, as well as Kohberger's documented history of being bullied for his weight when he was a teen, as well as his alleged former drug use, all of that may connect with some juror on some level to create some empathy. Plus, there's this.
This I don't think would be very popular with the jury. One could try to say, if there was some evidence for this, one could try to say that these girls, or at least one of the girls, led him on, made him believe that she was interested in him, and for months, and then ultimately she rejected him, and so it was such a devastating change, and that's what kicked him off, what made him ultimately kill them all.
I agree there, that probably wouldn't be popular with the jury, and it kind of risks the admission that Kohberger was mad or upset with one of the victims, so it is really unlikely that we are going to see that particular angle play out in court. But what we know we will see is a serious defense of Bryan Kohberger's innocence from his lawyers. Now, there is a teeny tiny minuscule chance that he will plead guilty at the next hearing and this would all be over, but we are far more likely to see this heading to an explosive jury trial in the coming months. And as you've heard, the road to reasonable doubt is rocky for the defense, but it is possible. So until then, check out all of our...
What I find strange is that when Kohberger was driving with his father back to Pennsylvania, if Kohberger did this crime, this horrific quadruple murders, he's a very intelligent man who has a PhD in criminology. He has a master's in crime and justice, and he has a bachelor's in psychology. He knows what crime scene is like. So my question is, wouldn't he wash the car? It doesn't seem like he washed the car. So I do not think that Kohberger could have been a part of this. Because he's an intelligent man. He would have known better. Look at how dirty his car is. I'm not making fun of him, but what I'm trying to say is he would have washed his car. Because obviously, if he did the quadruple murders, there would have been serious evidence and DNAs on the car and inside the car. But they haven't found that, I believe. So this is really concerning for me, because I believe if BK did not do this crime and they release him, then who did this crime? That means the real killers who are involved, trigger warning, are out there. They could be the fraternities, sororities, allegedly. They could be Kaylee's former boyfriend, Jack D., Jack S., the 4 Champos, the boys in the body cam, because they were acting very suspicious. They all were looking into their phones. Saeed was looking into his phones. The garbage hasn't been checked properly. Now that's a red flag. Look at Kohberger's car. It's really dirty. I believe he would have washed his car. Look at the guy who's collecting the garbage behind. He doesn't have any gloves on. Or does he? Anything could have been in the garbage can or container. Please like, share, and subscribe. Justice for the 4 victims. And condolence to